committee.
Mr. Cornwall, counsel for the committee, will now continue the questioning of Governor and Mrs. Connally.
At this point, Mrs. Connally, I'd like to ask you some questions about what your memory is of what happened on Elm Street after the limousine passed underneath the Texas School Book Depository. How many... Excuse me. What distance after turning the corner do you recall the car going before you noticed something was wrong?
Not very far. I don't really know how far. Do you want me to just tell you everything I remember?
That would be fine.
I heard, you know how we were seated in the car, the President and Mrs. Kennedy, and John was in front of the President, and I was seated in front of Miss Kennedy. I heard a noise that I didn't think of as a gunshot. I just heard a disturbing noise and turned to my right from where I thought the noise had come and looked in the back and saw the President clutch his neck with both hands. He said nothing. He just sort of slumped down in the seat. John had turned to his right also when we heard that first noise and shouted, "No, no, no," and in the process of turning back around so that he could look back and see the President, I don't think he could see him when he turned to his right. The second shot was fired and hit him. He was in the process of turning, so it hit him through this shoulder, came out right about here. His hand was either right in front of him or on his knee as he turned to look, so that the bullet went through him, crushed his wrist, and lodged in his leg. Now, all I knew was, and then he just recoiled and just sort of slumped in his seat, and I thought he was dead. When you see a big man totally defenseless like that, then you do whatever you think you can do to help most. And the only thing I could think of to do was to pull him down out of the line of fire or whatever was happening to us. And I thought if I could get him down, maybe they wouldn't hurt him anymore. And so I pulled him down in my lap. We learned later, I read a lot of stories that upset me later because they said that we slipped down into the floor, that John slid off fell over into my lap. Those little jump seats were not very, very big, and there was no way that he could have slid to the floor. There's no way that either of us could have got to the floor. So the only thing that I could do was pull him down, and by leaning over him, I hoped if anything else happened, they wouldn't hurt him anymore. I never looked back after John was hit. I heard Miss Kennedy say they have shot my husband. Then I heard a third shot and felt matter cover us. And she said, "They've killed my husband. I have his brains in my hand." I thought John was dead, and I heard the Secret Service man say, "Let's get out of here quick." And so we pulled out of the motorcade, and we must have been a horrible sight flying down that freeway with these dying men in our arms and going to no telling where. We could just see the crowd flashing by. John said nothing. I said only to him from the time I saw one little movement that made me think he is still alive. Then I kept whispering to him, "Be still. It's going to be all right. Be still. It's going to be all right." I've read stories where I screamed and he screamed and all these things, and there was no screaming in that horrible car. It was just a silent, terrible drive. We got to the hospital. Yes, it was the hospital. The car stopped, and John was still in my lap, but I knew he was alive, and people were swarming all around the car, and they were trying to get Miss Kennedy to get out so they could get the president out, and she didn't seem to want to get out of the car, and I sat there for what seemed to me an awfully long time, but probably was just a few minutes, wondering how long I had to sit there with this man dying in my arms before I could ask somebody to do something. And at about that moment, John just sort of heaved himself up out of my arms and then just kind of collapsed in front of the door. And at that moment, the door opened and somebody picked him up and just ran off down the corridor, and I ran along behind him. We got into what later I found was trauma room 1 and trauma room 2. The president was on a stretcher right behind us, I guess. I still had never looked back. And John was in the room on the right, and as we approached, the president was on the right and John was on the left, and I stood there. So alone. I never have felt so alone in my life. And there was much commotion racing all around us. I saw all sorts of artillery and weapons, and I assume it was the Secret Service or security, I don't know, racing up and down around the corridor. And finally, somebody brought 2 chairs and sat them outside these 2 doors, and I sat in one, and Miss Kennedy sat in the other. I kept seeing all this commotion in the president's room, and I wondered if I knew the president was dead, but I wondered if they weren't all over there, nobody taking care of John. And the only thing that would calm me a little was I'd get up every now and then and just push open the door in the room where he was, and if I could see any movement or hear him say anything, then I was content to wait. They sent me out 1 cuff link. Then they came out and took him down the corridor to the operating room, and I just ran along behind the stretcher, not knowing what I was running to or what I was running from, but run I knew I must. And all during the surgery, which was 3.5 hours, I was in some little waiting room, and the doctors were just wonderful. They kept sending messages out to me to say that John would be all right, that the bullet had missed all the vital organs, and where he was in bad shape, he would be all right. And
Thank you.
What else?
Governor, let me ask you the same question. What is your memory of the events? What did you see and hear? What happened after the limousine started down Elm Street and passed underneath the Texas School Book Depository?
Mr. Cornwell, we had just turned on Elm. We'd gone, I suspect, 150, 200 feet, when I heard what I thought was a rifle shot. And I thought it came from, I was seated right, as you know, on a jump seat right in front of the president. And they have a fairly straight back on them, so I was sitting up fairly erect. I thought the shot came from back over my right shoulder. So I turned to see if I could catch a sight of the president out of the corner of my eye, because I immediately frankly had the fear of an assassination, because I thought it was a rifle shot. I didn't think it was a blowout or an explosion of any kind. I didn't see the president out of the corner of my eye, so I was in the process of, at least I was thinking of turning, and I was turning to look over my left shoulder into the back seat to see if I could see him. I never made the full turn. About the time I turned back, where I was facing more or less straight ahead, the way the car was moving, I was hit. I was knocked over, just doubled over by the force of the bullet. It went in my back and came out my chest, about 2 inches below and to the left of my right nipple, and the force of the bullet drove my body over almost double, and when I looked, immediately I could see I was just drenched with blood. So I knew I'd been badly hit. And I more or less straightened up. At about this time, Nellie reached over and pulled me down into her lap. And I was in her lap, facing forward, when another shot was fired. I only heard 2 shots. I did not hear the shot that hit me. I wasn't conscious of it. I'm sure I heard it, but I was not conscious of it at all. I heard another shot. I heard it hit. It hit with a very pronounced impact, just almost like that, almost that loud a sound. It made a very, very strong sound, and immediately I could see blood and brain tissue all over the interior of the car and all over our clothes. We were both covered with brain tissue.
Matter.
And there were, there were pieces of brain tissue as big as your little finger. It was something that was unmistakable. There wasn't any question about, in my mind, about what it was. About this moment in time, Roy Kellerman, who was the Secret Service agent sitting in the right front seat, apparently was pushing some buttons on the panel, doing what I don't know, but I heard him say, "Let's get out of here fast." And the car lurched forward then. Bill Greer was the driver, and he accelerated it tremendously. When I was hit, or shortly before I was hit, no, I guess it was after I was hit, I said first, just almost in despair, I said, no, 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 no. Just thinking how tragic it was that we'd gone through this 24 hours that had all been so wonderful and so beautifully executed. The president had been so marvelously received, and then here at the last moment, this great tragedy. And I just said, no, 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 no. And then I said, right after I was hit, I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. The shots came, in my judgment, the 2 shots I heard came from the same direction, back over my right shoulder, came from behind us. Very clear to me where they came from. I don't think any shots came from any other direction. I was conscious until we hit the Stemmons Freeway, and then I faded into unconsciousness. I revived when the car came to a stop at what was Parkland Hospital. Apparently the braking of the car, we must have been traveling at an enormous rate of speed. The braking of the car brought me back to consciousness. And, it's strange what thoughts run through your mind. The first thought that occurred to me was that I was in the jump seat, that the right door of the car was opposite my seat, and that they couldn't reach the president without I got out of the way. And that's when I tried to raise myself up out of Nellie's lap and actually to try to get out of the car myself so that they could get to him in the back seat, because I knew he'd been hit, and I knew that their first concern would be for the president. So that was the reason why I lurched up or tried to get up out of a reclining position, and of course I couldn't. I wasn't able to, and I got about halfway up and then just slumped again, as Nellie just told you. Then someone did pick me up and put me on a stretcher and took me into an emergency room or trauma room, whatever it was. I obviously didn't know what it was. At that point, I felt the first pain, really, that I had experienced. And when I was on the stretcher, I was laid out, and then there was excruciating pain in my chest. At the time I was hit, strangely enough, I felt no sharp pain. It was as if someone had come up behind me and with a doubled up fist and just hit you in the back, right between the shoulder blades. It was that kind of a sensation. And I would have to volunteer the very, very strong opinion. I know much has been written, much has been discussed. I was being a participant. I can only give you my impressions. But I must say to you, as I said to the Warren Commission, I do not believe, nor will I ever believe, that I was hit with the first bullet. I don't believe it. I heard the shot. I heard the first shot. I reacted to the first shot. And I was not hit with that bullet. Now, a great deal of speculation that the President and I were hit with the same bullet. That might well be, but it surely wasn't the first bullet. And Nellie doesn't think it's the second bullet. I don't know. I didn't hear the second bullet. I felt the second bullet. We obviously weren't hit by the third bullet. I was down, reclining in her lap at the time the third bullet hit.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand one statement. You said that Mrs. Connally doesn't agree it was the second bullet or the same bullet?
The second bullet.
The second bullet?
That's what?
That hit me.
Yeah, it was
that
the second.
that hit him and me.
Oh. No, I thought I heard 3 shots. I had 3 reactions, 3 separate reactions. First shot, and I looked and saw the President. Second shot, John. And the third, all this matter all over it.
So you agree that your recollection, it was the second shot that hit the governor?
I know it was the second shot that hit the governor.
And where you disagree as to the possibility or the question of whether or not it was the same bullet that hit. Is that accurate? In other words, the governor has no knowledge on that subject matter. Would that be accurate? That since you didn't turn around to see the President after the first noise, you don't know whether he was hit, and Mrs. Connally's recollection is that she did turn and saw him hold his throat before you were hit. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I never saw him. I never saw Miss Kennedy after the shots were fired. I never saw either one of them.
All right.
And I don't know when he was hit.
And you've testified that of the 2 shots that you have a memory of hearing, they both, your immediate impression was they came from the right rear.
That's correct.
And I don't believe we heard what Mrs. Connally's recollection is on that. What was your impression as to the direction from which the 3 shots you heard came?
All from the right rear.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions at this time.
This time the chair will recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine, for extensive questioning, after which the committee will go under the 5-minute rule for other members of the committee who have questions of the witnesses. Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, Ms. Connally, I know this is very difficult for you to have to relive this situation again and again. I know that you, Governor, testified before the Warren Commission, and I'm not sure whether you did also. And we appreciate the fact that we're trying to refresh your recollection on something that happened nearly 15 years ago, although it appears to be quite vivid in your mind, and the responsibility of this committee, as you know, on mandate from the House is to see whether or not there are any unturned stones or any evidence that has not been presented to the Warren Commission, or that any different conclusions may result from the testimony of persons on the scene. Relating specifically to your testimony, Mrs. Connally, you heard one shot and you turned to your right and witnessed the president grasping his throat with both hands. Was anything said by anyone at that time?
Nothing.
Then what is the next sound you heard? You were still looking back at the president. Did you hear another sound?
I heard the second shot. Yes.
Second shot. Were you looking back at that time, or were you looking forward again?
I don't know.
Don't recall. That second shot is the one that you said hit
I
your
was
husband?
horror-stricken when I looked back, and I may have still been just looking.
But at that time you
Very
heard a second
difficult
shot.
thing to believe.
Now the second shot that you heard is the one you believe hit Governor Connally.
I know it hits Governor Connally.
And then after you knew that he was hit and you pulled him over in your lap, you then heard the third shot.
Yes,
And again from over your right shoulder.
yes.
Did you look back at that time?
I never looked back after John was hit.
Have you had any experience at all with firearms over
Yes.
the years? Would you say in your judgment that the shot that you heard or the shots that you heard were from a rifle or a handgun?
Oh, no, I'm not that much of a...
You don't know, but
And I'm not expert at all.
all right.
Shooting.
Governor, I think you testified that you heard but two shots and that you don't think that you heard the shot that struck you. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And both of these came from over your right shoulder.
Yes, sir. From behind me and over my back behind me over my right shoulder. That's correct.
The first shot that you heard, which caused you to look to your right, I think you said you didn't get far enough around to see the president. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Did you recognize the sound as being a rifle shot or a handgun shot?
I thought it was a rifle shot.
And then you turned around and started to turn around to look over your left shoulder to see what?
See if the president was all right, because the thought flashed through my mind that if this was a rifle shot, which I believed it to be, that it was probably an assassination attempt, and I was trying to see if anything had happened in the automobile.
Was that the time that you exclaimed no, 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 or was it later?
Well, it was a bit later, because I wasn't sure at that point in time that anything had happened. So it was a bit later when I said, oh, no, no, no. This was after I realized I'd been hit. And then I said, my God, they're going to kill us all.
But as you turn from looking over your right shoulder, you're about facing forward in the process of turning to look over your left shoulder when you were hit.
Yes, sir.
But you heard no shot that hit you.
No, sir, I did not.
And that caused you to lean forward?
Yes, sir.
And you said you saw a great deal of blood?
Yes, sir.
Were you aware at that time that you were hit in the hand and leg also?
No, sir, I was not.
And when did you first become aware of that? In the emergency room or else?
I became aware of that when I regained consciousness on Sunday, I guess. Sunday morning, I woke up and regained consciousness to see my arm tied up in a sling and my leg bandaged, and I said, what happened to my arm? And that's when I first learned that the bullet had gone through my chest and through my wrist and had broken all the bones in my wrist.
Reflecting back, do you have an opinion that you would have been able to physically remove your body from your position on the jump seat to a different position in the limousine during the time lapse between the first sound and the impact that hit you?
I'm sorry, Congressman. You might
Well, to put it this way, I think either you or Mrs. Connally said that the jump seats were so close to the back of the front seat that there was no way that you could have slumped to the floor.
Right.
And that the only position you could have ultimately moved into was to be over on Mrs. Connally's lap. Is that accurate?
I think that's a correct statement.
I believe you testified in response to Mr. Cornwell that you heard only 2 shots. They came from behind, and there was not any from any other direction. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Mrs. Connally, would you also make the same statement?
Except that I heard all 3.
Is it possible that there could have been more than 3 shots, as far as your recollection is concerned?
I guess anything's possible,
Yes.
but I heard 3 shots.
You heard 3 definitely, no less, and probably no more. Is that right?
That's all I heard.
And Governor Connally, you said that you heard 2 shots. That's the one that hit you, you apparently did not hear.
That's correct.
I would take it then by negative implication that you heard no shots coming from your right front
No, sir, I did not.
in the area that has often been described as the grassy knoll.
No, sir. And I don't believe any came from there.
We responded to all these shots. So if something came from the front, we certainly would have responded to a noise from the front, I would think.
All right, now getting back prior to the time of the actual shooting.
Gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Dodd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor and Mrs. Connally, to repeat what my colleagues have said, we do appreciate your being here this morning, particularly in recounting what must have been one of the most agonizing, if not the most agonizing moments of your lives. I'd like to just go back over, if I could, those seconds that occur at the time that the shots rang out. And let me try and repeat what I understood to be your testimony, and you correct me if I'm wrong anywhere in terms of my understanding of the sequence of events as they occurred. First you, Mrs. Connally, if I can, because there is a bit of a difference as I heard both of your responses. You heard a shot, or what appeared or sounded like a shot, a sharp noise to you. You turned to your left or your right?
All right.
You turned to your right. And as you turned around and saw the president, you saw him clutching his throat.
I saw him reach up to his throat.
Both hands were on his throat. Did you see any blood at all?
No.
Did you turn back, or did you hear the second shot?
See, I don't know.
You don't know which you did first.
What do you mean?
Well,
Which I did
you
first?
saw him
I looked
clutch-
back, and I guess I just stayed looking back until I heard the second shot.
So the second, you're still looking at the president, and it's your recollection that you then heard what sounded like a second shot. Is that correct?
Yes. What was the second shot?
And at that point, your husband, Governor Connally, slumped over in your direction.
No. He lunged forward and then just kind of collapsed,
And then collapsed.
but not just straight up.
And then you heard a third shot, or what appeared to be a third shot.
After I pulled him down,
But you did hear
I did hear a third shot.
a third shot. And at that point, you then noticed the material,
All over.
the blood, and so forth.
Yes.
When you turned and saw the president holding his throat, as I understood your testimony, the president didn't utter any sound or any word at all to your recollection.
Nothing.
Now, Governor, as I understood it from what your testimony was, you heard what sounded like a shot.
That's correct.
And you turned to your
Right.
But you did not see the president when you turned around.
That's correct. I didn't turn all the way around. I was sitting basically facing forward. I heard the shot. I looked over my right shoulder. I did not see the president out of the corner of my eye, and I mentally said I'll turn to my left and see if I can see him. And I had never made that full turn. I got halfway back, facing forward, when I was hit.
And did I understand your testimony correctly when you stated that you didn't actually hear a second shot, but rather you felt the impact as if someone had punched you almost in the back, a sharp blow to your back?
That is absolutely correct.
But you did not hear that?
I was not conscious of hearing the second shot.
WFCR Amherst.
Did you hear what could have been a second or a third shot? That was the only shot you heard, was the one that caused you to turn to your right?
No, I heard another shot, which was a shot that was fired after Nellie had pulled me down into her lap. It was the second shot I heard, the third shot she heard.
Okay.
The second shot I heard was the one that hit the president in the head.
Okay. Now, you did not immediately go unconscious?
No, I did not. I heard, I knew exactly what was happening in the car, and I didn't testify to it a moment ago, but I should, because I remember precisely what my wife remembers. I heard Miss Kennedy say, "They have killed my husband." And then she said, in a incredulous voice, I've got his brains in my hand." I heard that. I was still conscious. I heard Roy Kellerman say to Bill Greer, the driver, and perhaps to others, "Get out of here fast." Those things, and that's all that was said in that car.
Recognizing, of course, now we're asking you to recall something that occurred this many years ago. But if I could ask you to quantify in a frame of time, how long a period would it have been between the time you heard that first noise, it sounded to you as if it were a shot, you turned right, and the period in which you felt the impact in your back?
Congressman, I think it's impossible for me to say with precision, but obviously a very short period of time, a matter of seconds. Because I was in the, it was, I think, undoubtedly a fairly fluid movement. I heard the shot. I reacted by looking. I saw nothing, and I was in the process of turning when I felt the impact. I guess, 6, 8, 10 seconds, in that range. But I certainly couldn't be more precise than that. But it wasn't long.
Could it have been a second? What you're telling me is it's more like 2, 3, 4 seconds. It wasn't something that happened almost instantaneously.
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. Could not have been 1 second.
Thank you both. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Governor Mrs. Connally, welcome, and under the circumstances, we deeply appreciate your help. Governor, the two shots that you heard, did they sound exactly alike, as nearly as you can remember?
Did they sound
Exactly alike?
Yes, I found, I remember no distinction, Congressman Fithian, between the two shots.
And the shot that struck you, just in that split second before you heard that or felt that impact, did you hear any other impact like the third shot made? Was there any just split-second impact somewhere else before it hit you?
No.
Now, if I understand your summary, Mrs. Connally, the first shot would have come through the president's throat, and that was, you said you were...
I assume I saw him.
Right. And it was the second shot that hit the governor. And it wasn't until after the third shot that you saw the brain matter and so forth.
But instantly the shot, the car was covered. It was like buckshot falling all over us.
So your clear recollection is that you can account for something happening with each of the 3 shots that
Yes.
you heard fired.
Yes, sir.
Governor, you testified earlier, I believe, that you thought that both shots fired were rifle shots. You feel that you would be able to distinguish between a rifle and a pistol shot?
I guess you could simulate circumstances under which I'd probably fail the test, Congressman, but I think I can distinguish the difference. At least at that point in time, I thought it was a rifle shot. To me, and I haven't, in all the intervening years, I've not run any tests, I've not listened to any tests, but to me, a pistol shot has a flatter, louder, kind of a bang type of sound to it. A rifle shot has a rather singing crack to it. It's more like a crack, and then you get a kind of a singing sound with a rifle shot. And it's an entirely different sound from a pistol, from a shotgun, and from a rifle.
One last question, Mr. Chairman. When you heard any of the 2 shots that you heard, Governor, or any of the 3 that you heard, Mrs. Connally, is there any echo? Did you hear any echo from the building, or was there any sort of a sound effect along with it? Just heard the shot.
Congressman, I wasn't conscious of any echoes. I'm sure there probably were some, but I certainly was not aware of them.
But what you heard was just a very clear, distinct shot,
yes,
period.
Sir.
That's your recollection.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Sawyer.
Yes, Governor and Mr. Connally, I recognize that you probably don't view yourself as a ballistics expert by any means, but I assume you've done some hunting and are familiar with firearms from the way you talk.
Yes, sir. I've done a great deal.
So that we're not talking to someone totally inexperienced when we're talking about whether or not you can identify a rifle shot.
No, sir. I've shot a rifle all my life, and I've done a great deal of hunting, and
I suppose, too, that, and I've just been thinking about this since I heard your testimony, and I'm sure you've thought about it many, many more times. And without either being a medical expert or a ballistic expert, I presume it's reasonable to assume that with a man like Carcano traveling at least twice the speed of sound, the projectile must be at least 2,200 feet per second or more, I assume.
yes,
That the bullet would reach you before the sound would reach you, and with that kind of an impact on your nervous system, whether conscious or not, you probably wouldn't have registered the sound if there was one of the bullet that hit you.
I think that's precisely what happened, Congressman. No question about it. That's why I don't think there's any way that the first bullet hit me. I heard that sound, and I had not been hit. I heard that first rifle shot, and I did not hear, I was not conscious of the shot that hit me. And obviously, the bullet reached me before the sound did, and so in the shock of the hit that I took, I was just totally unconscious of the sound. And yet, by the 3rd shot, when Miss Connally pulled me down in her lap, I was awake. My eyes were open. I heard the shot fired. I heard it hit, and I saw the results very clearly. Now, you'll have a lot of expert testimony, and I'm delighted at the work of this committee, because hopefully we can cure up some of the speculation and the questions that have been asked over the years. But let me assure you that we may be wrong in what we say. We may be wrong in our impressions. We may be wrong when we ask precise questions about time, whether it's 2 seconds or 10 seconds. Under those circumstances, I can't say with certainty the precise second that things happen. But the things that we do remember and the things that we're testifying to here today, Congressman, are as indelibly etched in our minds as anything could ever be. And I will merely ask you to give yourselves the test. Ask any adult person over the age of 30 in this country, or over the age of 35, we'll say, where they were when they first heard the news of the assassination. They can tell you where they were, what they were doing, and who they were with. I have not asked one human being in the world, not anywhere in the world, that hadn't been able to tell me where they were, what they were doing, and who they were with at the time they first heard the news. The only point I'm making is that there are certain impacts on human consciousness and on the human mind that are indelibly etched there. Now, and these things are engraven in our minds, beyond any doubt. I'm not going to argue with a ballistics expert or acoustics expert about the precise time or the frame of the Zapruder films. I can't tell you precisely whether it's frame 231 or 234 when the first evidence shows that I'm reacting to the shot. But what we are saying to you, the things that we say to you with certain definiteness, it is because we are absolutely sure, at least in our own minds, that that's what happened and that's what we remember.
Well, I want to join the rest of my colleagues in expressing our appreciation for you, Governor, and Mrs. Connally coming up, and I want to just compliment you on the obvious frankness, touched with a little humor as best you can, this kind of a situation, and your warmth coming across. I appreciated it very much, and it kind of gave me a perspective on this that perhaps only someone that was there could really get, but you've certainly gotten across about as good a communication of it, at least to me, as I've had, and thank you very much.
Thank you, time of the gentleman has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from District of Columbia, Mr. Fauntroy, for additional questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just have one question on the firing. And that is, you are both familiar with this single bullet theory. My question, Governor Connally, is, given Mrs. Connally's recollection that there were 3 shots, one, the first of which hit the president, the second of which hit you, and the third of which hit the president, I wonder if it is your impression that the first shot that you heard missed, or whether it is your impression that first shot which you heard was the first shot which Mrs. Connally heard, which it is her impression caused the president to grab his throat.
You want to answer that?
No.
Well,
No,
I'll answer it. I think I don't know what the first shot did. All I'm certain of in my own mind is that the first shot did not hit me. Mm-hmm. Now, according to Ms. Connally's testimony, the first shot did hit the president. And that's when she turned around and saw him grasp his throat.
And later, the doctor said that there was a bullet that went through the fleshy part of his neck that would not have killed the president had that been the only shot he took. So obviously, that's why he was reaching up for his throat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Connally.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithian.
When you turned, Mrs. Connally, and saw the president, do you remember seeing the governor? Seeing where he was looking?
No, I heard the noise. I turned in the direction of the noise, and I observed the president, and I was horrified.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Cornwall, anything further? Governor Connally and Mrs. Connally, under the rules of our committee, any witness appearing before our committee and giving testimony is to be extended 5 minutes at the conclusion of their testimony for the purpose of explaining or in any way amplifying or expanding upon their testimony before this committee. I wish to extend to both of you at this time 5 minutes in order to make any further comments that you so desire.
You want to make it?
You think we'll tell them about the kind of wound and how we inadvertently saved your life?
No, I think not.
I have nothing.
Mr. Chairman, let me, for both of us, express our gratitude to you, Chairman Stokes, to all the members of the committee, to the staff of the committee, for what has been an obvious workmanlike approach that the staff has used in trying to develop all of the facts relating to this tragic event in the life of this nation. Unfortunately, I think for the peace of mind of a great many people, much speculation has arisen. Many rumors have flowed. Many theories have been advanced. This committee is going to be faced, I think, with the same task that the Warren Commission was faced with, namely, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove there was no conspiracy? I think that's the task that you have, but you've assembled a staff of obviously competent people with a determination to try to adduce all of the evidence that's available in the world, to properly analyze it and to properly present it. And to that extent, I think the committee is undertaking a task which I'm fearful will not answer all the problems, but nevertheless, your report will undoubtedly shed a great deal of light on a tragedy that this nation had and that this nation will live with. I wish I could believe that all of the speculation will end, that all the answers will be given, and all the rumors dispelled, and all the theories dissipated, but I don't believe that. And it won't be the fault of the staff nor the fault of this committee. I think it'll be a mere result of circumstances that are incapable of proof. And but for your effort, for your time, for your obvious dedication, we're grateful because we have obviously been a part of this event, and we will always be a part of it. And so the more that the American people can understand, I think the better the nation is. I would make one other comment, Mr. Chairman, that is a gratuitous comment that I hope is not inappropriate at this moment. Part of your task is to analyze the effectiveness of the Secret Service, the FBI, the other police agencies, and the furtherance of their duties with respect to this tragic occurrence. As Secretary of the Treasury, as you know, I had jurisdiction over the Secret Service. On many occasions, I talked to them about the problem of personal security of a president, of visiting dignitaries, and others. I happen to be of the view that if, very much as your Chief Counsel, Mr. Blakey, said of President Kennedy, that if there is a determined assassin, that beyond any question, he can be successful. I don't think there's enough protection that any man in public life is going to surround himself with that will preclude a determined assassin from carrying out his mission. I can only say to you that I think the Secret Service was a determined and a dedicated group to protecting the life of the president, and unfortunately, they failed. Senator Kennedy had security, but they were unable to cope with his assassin. President Ford, if you will recall, also had security, a great amount of security, but they probably would have failed too if the young lady had known how to use a gun. So that finally, I'm simply saying to you that I don't know that any political figure in this country can be spared an assassin's bullet, if indeed there is a dedicated assassin. So I would hope that the American people would understand that the mere fact that the Secret Service failed was not a failure of desire, not a failure of dedication, not a failure of talent, but rather a failure of inevitable circumstances. Finally, again, let me express for Ms. Connally and myself our appreciation for your kindness and for your courtesy and for the tremendous task that you've undertaken. Thank you very much.
Governor, I just say to both you and to Mrs. Connally, on behalf of this committee and the House of Representatives, we are indeed grateful to you for having appeared here today. Both of you in a very articulate way, have made a contribution to our work, for which we are indeed grateful. We thank you for having been here again. Thank you very much. Your excuse.